Hello, and perhaps we should say a word or two about the convention on labeling these lectures. Notice that this is the previous lecture was 1.0, and that corresponds specifically to a textbook chapter. When you see a point 1, point 2, point 3, what have you, the point 1s then are not represented in the textbook. This is solely from other research that I've done to incorporate this component. I thought to kind of round out the course. And some of the balance will be philosophical. Other pieces of balance are more empirical. For example, emotion and research will be one example of that, or emotion and psychopathy. So here we're going to talk about Confucian philosophy and Chinese poetics on emotion. Given the redoing of this course, there's a couple other subunits I'd like to do. I'd like to do one on India, and I'd like to do a more robust one on the Middle East, especially the role of Islam. We have a little on Islam, but not nearly enough that I would like to. The reality is, though, having to do everything for an online course has kind of forced my hand to just take what I've got and get it formatted that's appropriate. And future iterations of the course will expand a little bit more. So, again, OHIO, where are we? We're in China. I know Dr. Becky there was one of my colleagues at Columbus State, and she did a travel abroad and took her students to China, which is pretty freaking amazing. So that's where they did that picture. And isn't that interesting that the OH... Yeah, that this pose is not just Ohio State people, but it's also just Ohioans, right? Because these are Columbus State folks that went there. So let's move into it. Basic felt emotions then. These would be described as coarse emotions by William James, who is still kind of, like 1,500 years out in the future. And joy, anger, sadness, happiness would be Chinese analogs of this emotion, these coarse emotions. These might be basic emotions, the coarse emotions. There's going to be a lot of different titles that are going to be used on them. We are eventually going to get to probably where we're going to settle on kind of basic and complex emotions. But we're going to allow ourselves some flexibility in terminology, especially as we're getting there. Remember, ultimately, you're going to develop your own theory of emotion as part of this. Your own definition of emotion, and actually there's an assignment for you to develop a theory of emotion in partnership with some of your fellow students. So while there are no stirrings of pleasure, anger, sorrow, or joy, the mind may be said to be in a state of equilibrium. And notice that the balance or equilibrium now that's being talked about in Confucian is almost maybe the absence of emotion and perhaps a sense of calm and or openness. But when those feelings have been stirred, they act in their due degree and ensures what may be called the state of harmony. So emotions have a drive component in Confucian thinking, and their arousal might cause us to want to do something, cause us to want to make something to happen. And I'm going to float an idea much later in the course called emotions are for doing, and we might see them as drive states within and of themselves. Now, the golden mean was not just Aristotle. Confucius talks about it as well. Emotions perturb, but they can be brought into balance, thus achieving the golden mean. So notice we have parallel thinkers, tremendously separated by tremendous distance, right? And separated by time, and yet coming to similar conclusions. And it's that kind of triangulation I find fascinating when we see different philosophical and religious people kind of pointing in the same direction, but very diverse times and areas. Emotion then is part of a dynamic process to attain equilibrium. So emotions might push us, and then satisfaction then kind of puts the brakes on our behavior. What does this mean to us as people taking the lessons from Confucius? That exemplary persons seek harmony, not sameness. Petty persons then are the opposite. And if you have an opportunity to read the Analects, as I did for the preparation of this lecture, I would spend the time doing it. It's a wonderful set of ideas and philosophy that have tremendous guiding power. Right? So harmony and the temporal dimension then moves from the appreciation of details to an understanding of the whole, ultimately representing in harmony. So sometimes, the description here is we might get lost in the details and really miss the big picture, and the real satisfaction is probably derived from the big picture rather than the details. So emotions are phenomena in time that are always capable of further development and transformation. And as I said in the introduction, we're going to look at this time as the fourth dimension. And notice that time allows emotions to evolve. It allows our relationship to circumstances and people to change. A prized possession now, as a child, might be just a source of nostalgia 20 years hence. So time changes our relationship to the objects in our world, the relationships, and also then our emotional state. Savoring is the concept not just for prolonging an experience, doing it longer, I guess is the way to put it, but Chinese theories of savoring emphasize the self-reflexive awareness in which that object, that intentional object of emotion, is the experience rather than the experience of the object. So we experience the experience. It's almost like meta-experience or metacognition of experience, right? One does not primarily relish the smelling of the rose, but instead the delightful smell. So we immerse ourselves into that moment, and it's almost an attempt to suspend time and be with it. I'm going to use a term quite a bit in psychology of adjustment this semester since we're going existential, and we see where existentialism has kind of some pretty strong roots going back to Buddhism and Confucianism. Right, that this self-reflective process is essentially being with a feeling and effectively connecting it to the source stimuli. So I might choose aspects of the environment that I know evoke certain emotions, and then I get with that experience and make that experience everything at that moment in time. This would represent my being in the world, is the term that I will use, borrowing from Heidegger. It allows for the experience as well as the higher order reflexive experience of the experience. And I know that sounds kind of strange, but as we become masters of our place in the world, if we become in touch with our being in the world, then we move to be able to do these things, right? And then savor a necessary experience. So homework 1, and this is the 6th and final part, so one of the 6 of you want to latch on to this one. Describe a method example of savoring. This involves describing the context and situation and what it means to savor in this context. So you're going to be in a context or situation, you're experiencing something, and then describe the process of savoring within that context. This is especially cool if it's instructive and intentional, and that is I've chosen to do it. Right? I've set the stage, I've created the scenario. This might be the experience of a dinner party, and I put together a dinner party. I select the people carefully. I contemplate the menu. I shop carefully. I'm meticulous in the kitchen and the setting of the table. I know this sounds funny for many of us because it'd be not what we want to do. But then as we all sit down to the table and everyone's there, at some point mid-meal, we just kind of do an out-of-body experience where we just observe ourselves in the situation, the context we created, and we hold on to that moment, right? And really, really kind of uber experience the sensations at that point. That's the savoring. And notice, it can be by design, it could be something we can create. And for people who have this kind of meta-awareness, metacognition, they have the ability to do this to a greater and greater extent. And it adds a richness to life, I guess, is the idea. So who wants to take that on? Someone grab that, and let's wow each other with our application of these ideas. I don't want the ancients to be dead and buried. I want the ancients to live on through us. We can demonstrate our respect for them and their ideas, and because they were profound, and they hold to this day. And we might have this temporal narcissism that is my time is best and screw all the other times. And I don't think that's necessarily fair that those who came before us, because without them, obviously, we wouldn't be here. Now, detachment and immersion, concepts that are related to this. Detachment is the path to emotional refinement. And if you can imagine yourself observing yourself, detaching from yourself, and watching yourself operate in a situation, and watch your emotional experience, right? And you can feel it and you can observe yourself, but you become somehow detached from it. And it's almost like reason and soul and appetite now achieve their separate levels, but reason still has the ability to observe everything else going on. Immersion can be thought as the initial emotional response to the stimuli, even if it's prolonged, if it's a result of savoring. Thus, engaged detachment can allow significant emotional experience, yet a diminished potential to act on that emotion. And this becomes a very useful tool for all of us, that we may experience something, feel something very intensely. We might feel anger in the extreme, right? Like rage type anger. But to what extent can we experience that but then not externalize it? That is, it exists, but it doesn't necessarily have to drive me. I'm not required to act upon it. And this is a huge component of emotional intelligence. So when we look at Confucian thinking, Confucian philosophizing, thousands of years ago, we're talking about emotional intelligence, which became all the rage, in the 1980s. No, it's been all the rage since time began. We just began to bring it into the modern world and empirically test it, develop measures for it, etc. So detachment becomes the key to restraint. Through the engaged detachment, restraint is achieved, allowing the experience of the emotion, but the inhibition of the response. And that's the detachment. Yes, the emotion does not necessarily have to lead to the response. Now, for many people who, let's say, suffer anger issues, it's a straight path and there's no potential for restraint, and often these people get themselves into trouble, and the courts might mandate that they take anger management training, which is an attempt to then create some kind of inhibitory power in the person so they can restrain acting on felt emotions. So one may go for food slowly, chew slowly while savoring it. One may postpone intercourse and climax. I know I'm getting embarrassed already. Such restraint allows the increase of diversity, extent, and duration of sensation and feelings. So to what extent can we detach and immerse? And notice that those are kind of two opposing ideas, but to what extent can we integrate them and enrich our life experience, right? Thus, through restraint, we increase our awareness of the sensations and the stimulus relation to those sensations. This is also a component of mindfulness, Ellen Langer's Mindfulness, right? And great book to read, Mindfulness by Ellen Langer, and it's this idea of the awareness of situations, the awareness of our history with situations, the awareness of our link from our emotional state to situations and contexts. This is becoming masters of us rather than simply being reactive organisms in the environment. So action readiness then is tempered by detachment and restraint, right? And action readiness is the core of many modern theories of emotion, and I'm probably a strong subscriber to these ideas that emotions are for doing, right? Emotions are precursors to behaviors, and thus they possess a tremendous adaptive value if they're appropriate to the situation. And part of this comes through learning and socialization. So the cognitive appraisal process is exemplified by detachment and subsequent restraint, that is, thinking about the situation, what it causes me to feel, my relationship to those feelings, right? It can allow one to achieve harmony with any context. So that I become the master of me and my behaviors rather than me being a reactive organism and can easily be shoved around. Let's face it, we know some people, right, that are very predictable and they're very easy to anger, they're very easy to manipulate because they don't have this awareness. So they're essentially out of control in their existence. They're not masters of their existence. I know saying they're victims of their existence is probably a bit strong, but if they don't have the ability to restrain, they're off and running. My neighbor would be a great example of this. I can, with 2 or 3 words, 2 or 3 sentences, probably push my neighbor to want to physically attack me. He can't do the same to me. right? And that's a source of power, right? That I can intervene. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. But I can live that way, right? And I don't have to react, or I can choose the way I react. I can choose to react or not react. I can choose to react in any number of ways, right? And this is power, and this is why I keep going back to this idea that this is a story of you, this is a story of us, and it's typified in this course through our relationship with our emotions and other people. So it's this process of refinement, albeit in a pretty puny nutshell. Obviously, the Analects by Confucius go far beyond this, and I'm condensing it down into a couple main key points. Now, Chunxi is literally ruler's son, and if we more broadly apply it, it's the notion of gentleman. And it demonstrates humane governance and leadership. And we're going to talk about power in this class as it relates to emotion in a couple different contexts. But the idea is that if I achieve power, but if immersion and restraint are available to me, if self-reflective thought is, then I become a responsible wielder of power. And I think about how my power affects others. And I make choices on this basis, right? For the good of the whole, for the good of others, and not just forced by my appetite to exhibit power over others, which might lead to behaviors that are cruel for the purpose of being cruel, to simply demonstrate to me that I have power. Believe it or not, there's greater power in restraint than there is in manifest cruelty, if you will. And so the self-restraint becomes both in the social, how will I treat others and make them feel, but at the same time the ethical. To what standards do I hold myself? What is the importance of those standards, and how do I use those standards to facilitate my restraint process, right? And this is about leadership, and I think it's really important to reflect on this for a couple minutes, you guys, because here you are, you're Buckeyes, you're at Ohio State, and y'all have tremendous leadership potential. What on earth, what the hell are you going to do with it? Are you going to use it to harm others? I don't think you will, right? But let's just step back and try to be more aware of our impact on others, in that we're not hurting others, either intentionally, let's hope not, but unintentionally as well. And begin to take greater responsibility for our reactions. You know, some people say, well, take responsibility for your actions. Yes, I agree. But also take responsibility for your reactions and develop your inhibitory powers so that you don't have to react without choosing. That you can mindfully predict the outcome of your reaction and work backwards and choose to react in that manner or not. This is power, right? And this is tremendous power that we can develop in ourselves. So all of these are associated with mindfulness, and you can see where this concept of mindfulness just keeps repeating itself as part of a regulatory process. To what extent then, as Confucius instructs, can we behave consistent with Chunxi, that is, taking responsibility for ourselves and our impact on others? It's a tough one, right? But there's a lot of help that is available to us, to the extent that we want to choose a more mindful path. And that's it for this one. Thanks, guys.